Sewing is integrated into every aspect of our lives, from the clothes we wear to our house's decor. You simply cannot go through life without encountering something that is sewn together. But how many people know how to sew? A study conducted by the British Heart Foundation in the UK revealed that 59% of people were not confident in their sewing abilities, and 33% were not taught to sew at all. That's where my project comes in. I decided to strengthen my sewing capabilities and not become part of that statistic by sewing stuffed animals. At the beginning of the project, I knew how to sew on a button, hand sew a hole, and knew the basics of a sewing machine, but I was never confident in my skills. I set out on this project wanting to be able to have the skills to sew anything I pleased. To do that, I needed to strengthen my already known skills, learn how to read patterns, and learn how to sew intricate details. The first thing I did was dust off my sewing machine to learn how to use it again. It took some Googling and YouTube searches, but I was able to figure everything out and begin practicing. I used many pieces of scrap fabric to try to perfect turns, corners, and staying on track. Then it was on to buying fabric and patterns. The first place I went was straight to my mentor, Amelia. She guided me through buying 2 patterns that were within my sewing capabilities, but also hard enough to give me a challenge to improve my skills. Those patterns were of the elephant, penguin, and bear. Then we moved on to fabric. Although having a soft fleece fabric is great for stuffed animals, it would not have been the most forgiving fabric for my sewing skills. So she recommended I use cotton since it has little to no stretch, which makes it easier to sew. I listened to her advice and bought only enough cotton fabric for these 3 stuffed animals due to the fact I believed that I would have been able to go out and buy more. I was wrong, but I'll get more into that later. I only had 3 patterns, so I went online to buy more. I ended up buying the last 2 patterns on Etsy, and they came in a PDF, so I was able to get them right away. And lastly, I bought my stuffing from Amazon. I wanted to go in order of difficulty, starting with the easiest pattern first and then making my way to the hardest, which would be last. But after I completed the project, I realized that my order of difficulty was wrong, so I'll let you know my final ranking of difficulty later on. The first stuffed animal I started with was the penguin. I knew that it was going to be difficult to read patterns, but I stared at the instructions for this pattern for a while. But after scouring the internet, I finally learned enough to feel confident to cut out my pieces. After that, I had to mark up the seam allowance of all my pieces so I knew where to sew. Next was pinning and sewing it all together. It took some trial and error, but I eventually got the hang of it. This pattern had some very small intricate pieces like the feet and the nose, which might not have made it the best one to start out with. Overall, I was really pleased with how my first stuffed animal turned out. The next one I sewed was the bear. This was the biggest stuffed animal I was planning to make and was the least intricate one since it only had 4 pieces. The only thing that was new was darts, which after little research I was able to execute. I also still marked the seam allowance since I wasn't confident enough to just eye it. Although this was the easiest pattern I encountered during my project, this probably was my least favorite pattern to use just because I wasn't happy with the outcome. The third stuffed animal I made was the whale, which was the first Etsy pattern I used. It was easier to read than the mass-produced patterns since it was created by a regular person and not a huge company. Instead of marking the seam allowance like I did on my other stuffed animals, I just put tape on my sewing machine to show where the seam allowance would be. This helped save time. This pattern did not have a lot of pieces either, making it pretty easy to make. The only difficult part was the tail, which came out a little lopsided. The fourth stuffed animal I made was the pig, and it was the last Etsy pattern I used. It was a good pattern, but it was missing the seam allowance, so I had to add it myself, which took a lot of time. Overall, this is one of the harder patterns I used since it consisted of so many parts, and also the directions were a little vague at times, which added to the difficulty. Lastly, I made the elephant. This was definitely one of my favorites. The pattern resembled the pig's pattern a lot, except for the nose, ears, and tail, which made it easier since I already had experience with the pig. This pattern's instructions were also more detailed, making putting it together easier. Due to me being on the verge of running out of fabric, I was not able to add certain details that the pattern recommended, but if I was to make this elephant again, I would definitely add them in the future. Now for the difficulty ranking. By ranking them from least difficult to most difficult, I would say that the bear was the least difficult, followed by the whale, then the penguin, then the elephant, and the most difficult being the pig. And if I was to rank them in order from my most favorite pattern to my least favorite pattern, the order would be the elephant, the penguin, the whale, the pig, and then my least favorite being the bear. Although I really enjoyed my project, I still ran into problems. One of the main problems were technological issues. During this project, I used my phone to film me pinning and my brother's camera to film my sewing. During my construction of the pig, both my laptop and his camera ran out of storage, which left me unable to film more footage and unable to upload my footage. With my brother's help though, we were able to use his GoPro to film the rest of my sewing and his old laptop to upload the rest of my footage. After that, I would say stuffing the stuffed animals was pretty hard, even though many people would not think that. It took a long time to stuff each stuffed animal and make sure there were no lumps, and a few times I had to restart my stuffing because of that. I don't really see it as an age requirement or an age limitation. I see it as an interest level. This is what my mentor, Amelia LaFerrara, said during my interview when I asked her when is the best age to start sewing. This not only represents my project, but the senior project as a whole, since it allows 17 and 18-year-olds to try new things that we are interested in. Without her, this project would not be possible. When I was younger, I took some lessons with her at her studio, Sew and Show in Garwood, where she taught me the basics of sewing and sewing machines. This sparked an interest in me. But when I stopped my lessons, I stopped sewing altogether. This project was a way for me to relearn those basic skills she taught me, but also have the chance to learn more advanced skills and relight my interest in this art. She answered all my questions, gave me great advice regarding my project, and was a huge help. My research paper was about how children's hospitals help give their patients a childhood, even if it isn't a typical one. This idea came to me after remembering an article I read about the benefits of stuffed animals for premature babies, which is perfect since it connected sewing to my future career in nursing. My project was pretty much COVID-19 safe. It was an all-indoor project that didn't require much help from anyone else, other than the occasional question for my mentor. The only thing that affected me was running low on materials. I was able to create 3 stuffed animals with the fabric that I bought, but for the last 2, I used fabric that I had in a scrap bin for years, with one of those fabrics having a winter pattern on it. I was also very close to running out of thread, but luckily I still had some left to finish out the project. In conclusion, the 2 months I spent on this project have been very challenging, but also very rewarding. I learned so many useful skills that I'll be able to use for the rest of my life thanks to this project.